The 4 seasons are brought to Hyrule by the full power of the Game Boy Color. From the melting snows of the vast plain to the interior of a dark dungeon, the Game Boy Color can do it all. This is Legendary Adventures, a Legend of Zelda playthrough podcast. We've completed Oracle of Ages, and now it's time to dive into Oracle of Seasons. Usually I start out each game with a little introduction that has come to focus on the development of the game. This season's a little different because it's covering 2 games. I've already covered the development for Oracle of Seasons, but I thought it would be fun to take a look at some early story write-ups for the game, and a little more behind-the-scenes info before we dive into Oracle of Seasons itself. I found 2 write-ups describing an early version of Oracle of Seasons. Both were written following Nintendo's Space World 99 event, and both were obviously working from the same information provided by Nintendo. One was written for Nintendo.com, the quote I started this episode with came from that write-up, and the other was written for IGN. I'll read both, but you'll notice a lot of overlap because, again, they were working from the same info from Nintendo from the same event. Here's the Nintendo.com write-up. Surrounded by lush forests and towering majestic mountain peaks, the land of Hyrule is known for its natural beauty. But once again, the evil Ganon is scheming to disrupt the peace of Hyrule, and has kidnapped Princess Zelda, Keeper of the Seasons, and stolen the mystical Triforce of Power. Of course, Link embarks once again to save the princess. When Ganon hears of Link's departure, he shatters the Triforce of Power into 8 pieces and hides them throughout the land. As a final measure, he takes Zelda's Rod of Seasons and his hiding place, the conquered Hyrule Castle, to another dimensional world. Without the controlling influence of Zelda and the Rod of Seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter collide, causing chaos in the land of Hyrule. With the aid of the peculiar Ulra tribe and the mysterious tree that houses the spirits of Hyrule, the young hero must venture through the land of Hyrule and another dimension in order to find the Rod of Seasons and rescue Princess Zelda. Now here's the IGN write-up. Part 1 of a new trilogy of Zelda games, the other 2 are called Tale of Courage and Tale of Wisdom. Tale of Power starts off in the beautiful land of Hyrule. Princess Zelda, Keeper of the Seasons, and the mysterious Triforce of Power have been kidnapped by the series' token villain, Ganon. Knowing this, Link embarks on a new adventure to once again free the princess from the clutches of the villainous thief. Ganon, now aware of Link's powers, quickly splits the Triforce of Power into 8 pieces and hides them throughout the land. Even worse, Ganon has taken the Rod of Seasons, a wand that controls the flow of time, and beamed it along with Hyrule Castle to an other dimensional realm. Spring, summer, fall, and winter in the land of Hyrule have fallen into complete disarray. With the help of the other dimensional Ulra tribe and the mystery tree that houses the spirits, Link must now venture through the land of Hyrule and find a way into the other dimension. The story described in those write-ups seems to be sort of a mashup of the original Legend of Zelda, which saw the Triforce of Wisdom split into 8 pieces, and Princess Zelda kidnapped by Ganon, and the story of Oracle of Seasons, which we'll experience through this playthrough. In the final game, we'll see the Rod of Seasons, the seasons tossed into chaos by the villain, Onyx, a building transported to another location, underground rather than another dimension, and the titular Oracle of Seasons, Din, kidnapped by Onyx rather than Princess Zelda. It's interesting to note that both write-ups refer to the Ulra tribe, which appears to be the early name for the Subrosians in the final game. The mysterious tree referenced in Nintendo's write-up and called the Mystery Tree in the IGN write-up appears to be the Maku tree. The full articles for each also mention Ricky the Kangaroo, but use the alternate spelling of R-I-K-K-I instead of the R-I-C-K-Y spelling from the final game. Both write-ups also mention Maple the Witch, though IGN calls her Mabel. As a side note, and not related to these 2 write-ups, I found a Nintendo Power preview from March 2001 that refers to the villain of Oracle of Seasons as General Gorgon. According to ZeldaWiki.wiki, this was his Japanese name. It was changed to Onyx in the English localization. And though that article was published only a couple of months before release in North America, that change had apparently not filtered through the promotional materials yet. Let's get back to the early story write-up. I noted it's a mashup of the original game and Oracle of Seasons. Why is that? Well, I can't say for sure. It is often stated that Oracle of Seasons began as a remake of the original game before morphing into an original project. And there are quotes from the developers that would appear to back that up. But there are also quotes that would appear to contradict that. I touched on this a bit on the first episode of this season, but let's revisit it. In a 2009 Iwata Asks interview, Zelda co-creator Takashi Tezuka said, "The plan was to create a remake of the first The Legend of Zelda. I thought if it was going to be an adaptation of the first one, then it should be alright." But the project ballooned from there. Ultimately, Capcom was working on 3 or maybe 4 games. The 3 games are widely known. They were known as the Triforce Trilogy, but they were ultimately cut down to 2 games and became Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. The potential 4th game is a remake of the original. Let's look at the statements that could potentially support Oracle of Seasons beginning as a remake of the original game. In a 2001 interview, originally translated and published on Nintendo.com, producer Yoshiki Okamoto said, "I thought we should produce a new version of the first Zelda game for Game Boy Color. Then, if it went well, we would move on to the next stage, making a more ambitious game. But my people wanted to skip that first phase and create their own Zelda game from the beginning." And in a 2001 interview published on Game Design Gazette that originally appeared on Nintendo's online magazine, director Hidemaru Fujibayashi said, "At first we'd only planned on creating a game 1/10 the size of the final version, but it just kept growing as development progressed and gradually turned into an original game." So, if it's true that a remake project did in fact morph into Oracle of Seasons, then the mashup story perhaps makes sense and is a sign of that shift in progress. On the other hand, I found a seemingly forgotten exchange between Okamoto and Zelda co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto that seems to contradict that idea. That exchange happened in a 2001 interview, originally translated and published on Nintendo.com. This interview was divided into 2 parts on Nintendo.com. Most sites that I find reference this interview only reference and link to the first part, and the link to the second part is broken on those archive links. Portions of the interview were published in Nintendo Power, but this particular exchange was not included. I, however, did find a site that included both parts, and was able to locate an archive snapshot of Nintendo.com that includes both parts. So here's that exchange from that seemingly forgotten second part of the interview. Okamoto said, "We actually had another Zelda game finished." The interviewer asked, "Another one?" Okamoto replied, "Yes, the 3rd one. Well, actually, it's the first Zelda I was talking about before. As for that one, we'll be debating about it later." He laughed. The interviewer followed up, "About whether or not you'll release it?" Okamoto said, "We'll be debating it later, like, come on, release it." Miyamoto chimed in and said, "There are actually 4. "Oh right, 4, Okamoto responded. The interviewer gave a confused, "Huh?" then laughed. Okamoto then said, "The 4th one was cancelled." To which Miyamoto responded, "Right, that was the most producer-like thing I've done on this entire project." This is the only direct reference that I can find that the Capcom remake of the first game was finished. So, could it be true? Well, let's look at what we know. It seems the decision for Capcom to create a series of games came fairly early on in the process. Okamoto initially pitched the remake to Shigeru Miyamoto. In his 2001 interview, Fujibayashi said, "After that, the staff without a project on their hands started to create a 2D game based on the Famicom, or NES, Legend of Zelda. Sometime after that, a second pitch was prepared. Fujibayashi described himself joining the project in a secretarial role. He wrote up the proposal, and it sounds like he compiled ideas from Okamoto and others on the team, including himself. He and Okamoto then presented it to Miyamoto." Here's what he had to say about what was in that proposal for the follow-up to the remake. "The core of the game was pretty much decided. That is to say, the fact that it would be on Game Boy Color, the use of the 4 seasons, and the decision to retain the feel of the 2D Zelda games. It was also decided that it would be a series, so I thought up the link system as a way to make use of that idea." After digging through these interviews, I'm not really sure what to think. There are, of course, the other quotes I described, which do seem to imply that Oracle of Seasons started as the remake of the original game. You'll also find a number of strong references to the original game scattered throughout. However, as we've seen in the past episodes of this season, Oracle of Ages also featured a number of direct references to the original game. But then again, Oracle of Seasons has more of those references overall. Its bosses largely come from the first game. Is this because Oracle of Seasons started life as a different project? That's possible, but it could also just as easily be because the developers are fans of the game. That's something that co-creator Takashi Tezuka noted. In fact, in the 2009 Iwata Asks interview, he said their enthusiasm for the series is what helped him get over his hesitations about letting an outside studio work on Zelda. Speaking specifically about Okamoto, he said, "I realized he had quite a strong affection for the Legend of Zelda games. Normally, though, I would have been resistant to leaving games like The Legend of Zelda or Super Mario Bros. To anyone else." Speaking more broadly about the team at Capcom, he said, "I could sense their enthusiasm for the series, so I thought we could trust them with it." Fujibayashi directed both games. In his 2001 interview published on Game Gazette, he was asked if he was a Zelda fan. He responded, "Yes. In the case of the Famicom, or NES game, I went straight to the toy store to buy it. I remember running to buy it fist tight around my New Year's money." And in a 2003 interview with the Japanese website Gpara, Fujibayashi described the original Legend of Zelda as a favorite game of his. So, is this a case of a remake turning into an original game? Or is it a case of Zelda fans just getting to play in the Zelda playground? I can't say for sure. But it is clear that whatever the case may be, Oracle of Seasons is a game that is absolutely in conversation with the original Legend of Zelda. And I will do my best to point out the references to the original game, and also references to other games in the series in my upcoming episodes. Okay, enough rambling about that. I also wanted to take some time to talk about the art of the Oracle games. The book, The Legend of Zelda: Art and Artifacts, published by Dark Horse Comics, contains an interview with Nintendo illustrators Yusuke Nakano, Yoshiki Haruhana, Satoru Takizawa, and Takumi Wada. As part of the interview, Nakano discussed his work on the art of the Oracle games. According to Nakano, he got involved after the pixel art for the games was complete. He would travel to Capcom's headquarters in Osaka to ensure that they had a unified vision on the project. Nakano said, "I had them observe my process of coming up with rough sketches based on pixel art and how that translates into character designs. We discussed it in detail." According to Nakano, the art of the games is inspired by the art from Link's Awakening and A Link to the Past, but updated. One update is Link's nose. He had a long nose in the art from the early games. When talking about the development of Ocarina of Time, I mentioned that Yoshiaki Koizumi specifically gave Link a sharper nose as part of his redesign for that game. Nakano carried that idea to these games as well. Link also wears white tights inspired by his Ocarina of Time design. Nakano said, "We also made a few anime-like touches that gave the art style a brighter look. We took this newly redesigned Link to Miyamoto, but he didn't seem to like it very much." When asked what he thought the reason was for Miyamoto's seeming dislike of the design, Nakano jokingly suggested it was because Link's nose wasn't long enough. He more seriously said, "What seems most likely is that Miyamoto still had a strong attachment to the Link from A Link to the Past, but it was exactly 10 years since the release of A Link to the Past. So, for me, it felt like it was better for Link to look more in line with the preferences of the customers at that time." Nakano said that he specifically tried to make his designs look like something that might have come from Capcom, even though it was drawn by a Nintendo designer. He described his work on the Oracle games after working on Majora's Mask as being like dispelling the dark and returning to the light world. Thanks for listening to this episode of Legendary Adventures. Next week, we're going to dive into the opening of Oracle of Seasons. A big thank you to everyone who has subscribed and is following along. You are awesome. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. I'm Paul Riley, and I will see you next week.